At approximately 1000 hours, a Ukrainian Air Force MiG-29 fighter jet carried out a strike mission against a Russian military position that had been covertly established inside a grain silo facility. According to the available account of the operation, the structure had been converted by Russian forces into a long-range drone command hub used to coordinate unmanned aerial vehicle activity in the region. The attack occurred over territory close to the front line, in an area characterized by open agricultural land, scattered industrial buildings, and defensive positions operated by Russian troops. The aircraft approached the target at extremely low altitude, reportedly flying at around 55 feet above ground level while traveling at high speed. Such flight profiles are commonly used to reduce the likelihood of radar detection, as terrain and ground features can partially mask aircraft from conventional radar systems. For the initial phase of the mission, the aircraft advanced without visible interference while maintaining a steady course toward the designated strike point. However, the situation changed when Russian forces detected the aircraft's presence through infrared observation. Approximately 9 minutes into the mission, a concealed checkpoint identified the heat signature of the MiG-29. An operator using an Igla man-portable air defense system launched 2 missiles within seconds. The missiles rose rapidly and attempted to intercept the aircraft as it maneuvered at low altitude. The pilot responded immediately by executing rapid evasive maneuvers. The fighter jet reportedly changed direction sharply, first banking left and then right in quick succession, attempting to break the missile's tracking path. Such maneuvers generate strong gravitational forces inside the cockpit and require precise control to avoid loss of stability, particularly when flying close to the ground. Despite the limited altitude margin, the aircraft continued forward while the missiles failed to strike their target. Shortly after the first attempted interception, additional launches occurred from another Russian position located near a tree line south of the flight path. 4 more missiles were fired from different angles, creating a converging interception pattern in the airspace behind the aircraft. The launches produced visible smoke trails that crossed over the landscape and effectively revealed the aircraft's approximate location to nearby defensive units. Because infrared-guided missiles do not trigger certain onboard radar warning systems, the aircraft's threat receiver reportedly remained silent during the initial attacks. This meant the pilot relied largely on visual cues and situational awareness to detect incoming threats. During this stage of the flight, the MiG-29 descended even lower, dropping to roughly 45 feet above ground level, while maintaining speeds exceeding 500 knots. Flying at that altitude requires constant adjustments, as the terrain elevation changes rapidly. At such speeds, even small miscalculations can lead to collision with ground obstacles or terrain features. According to the operational description, the aircraft navigated through fields and ridges, while missile trails continued to form behind it, indicating multiple attempts by Russian teams to intercept the jet. As the mission progressed, additional air defense positions joined the engagement. Another pair of Igla operators reportedly fired missiles from a rooftop position located ahead of the aircraft's route. In this case, the missiles were launched behind the jet's flight path in an attempt to intercept it as it passed through the area. The missiles climbed, curved, and attempted to descend into the narrow corridor through which the aircraft was traveling. Throughout these evasive maneuvers, fuel consumption became a significant factor. Each sharp turn required substantial engine power, increasing fuel usage during a mission that already involved high-speed, low-altitude flight. The aircraft had departed with approximately 6,900 pounds of internal fuel. After the initial wave of evasive maneuvers, the remaining amount had already decreased significantly, reducing the margin for prolonged combat or additional maneuvers. Despite these constraints, the pilot continued toward the target, relying on memorized terrain features and pre-planned waypoints prepared during mission planning. Such preparation is critical for low-altitude strike operations, where navigation systems can be disrupted, and pilots must rely on detailed knowledge of the terrain and the expected flight corridor. During the mission, one of the incoming missiles detonated behind the aircraft at a distance of roughly several hundred meters. Although it did not directly hit the fighter, fragments from the explosion reportedly struck the airframe. One fragment penetrated the compressor stage of the aircraft's left engine, causing a sudden spike in exhaust temperature. In response, the pilot shut down the damaged engine to prevent catastrophic failure. With one engine no longer operational, the MiG-29 continued the mission on reduced thrust while still inside hostile territory. The aircraft remained deep behind the front line while Russian defensive positions continued to engage it with both missile systems and anti-aircraft artillery. As the aircraft approached the area near Ola Pristan, additional defensive fire intensified. Multiple Zu-23 anti-aircraft gun systems reportedly opened fire simultaneously, creating dense patterns of tracer rounds in the sky. These systems rely less on precision targeting and more on predicted flight paths, filling sections of airspace with projectiles in an attempt to force aircraft into lethal trajectories. Despite sustaining damage and operating with reduced propulsion, the aircraft maintained its course toward the strike objective. The mission objective remained the destruction of the converted grain silo facility, believed to be directing drone operations in the sector. According to the operational account, the pilot continued advancing through the heavily defended corridor while managing damage to the aircraft and persistent air defense activity from Russian positions. As the damaged MiG-29 continued deeper into contested airspace, additional elements of the Russian air defense network began reacting to the aircraft's presence. The earlier missile launches and visible smoke trails had already alerted nearby units, prompting a wider response across the sector. Russian positions, positioned between the riverbank and the outskirts of nearby settlements, began focusing sensors and weapons toward the corridor through which the aircraft was flying. The fighter jet remained extremely low, in some moments just tens of feet above the ground. Terrain clearance fluctuated significantly as the aircraft crossed ridges, fields, and scattered infrastructure. At speeds exceeding 560 knots, the margin for error was extremely small. Pilots conducting such missions must constantly adjust altitude to avoid terrain, while simultaneously maintaining sufficient speed to reduce vulnerability to air defense systems. The aircraft briefly climbed to approximately 820 feet as it approached the area around Ola Pristan, an area described as densely populated with rooftops, cranes, and defensive firing positions. At this stage of the mission, multiple Zu-23 anti-aircraft gun teams opened fire. These systems, which fire high-velocity 23mm rounds, are widely used for short-range air defense. Rather than attempting precise targeting of the aircraft itself, operators fired controlled streams of ammunition along the aircraft's projected path in an effort to create a barrier of fire. Tracer rounds became visible in the sky, forming bright streaks that marked the trajectory of the anti-aircraft fire. According to the operational description, every fifth round produced a tracer effect, allowing gun crews to visually adjust their aim. Such patterns are intended to saturate an area of airspace rather than rely on single-shot accuracy. At the same time, the aircraft began experiencing additional technical issues. Hydraulic pressure dropped, and cockpit warning indicators alerted the pilot to a failure in the primary hydraulic system. The aircraft's backup hydraulic system automatically engaged, but the reduced capacity significantly limited control authority. Flight controls became heavier and less responsive, making precise maneuvering more difficult while the aircraft remained under fire. Another projectile struck the aircraft's mid-fuselage during this phase of the flight. The impact forced the aircraft into a sudden roll to the left, requiring immediate correction. With only one engine still operating and degraded control systems, the pilot countered the roll using rudder input and available engine thrust. Despite the damage and reduced performance, the aircraft continued toward the strike objective. Meanwhile, the weapon carried under the aircraft's wing, a JDAMER guided bomb, was approaching its planned release window. This type of munition uses a combination of satellite navigation and inertial guidance to glide toward a designated target. Under optimal conditions, the system can achieve high accuracy, but it relies on stable satellite signals to maintain precise guidance. Electronic warfare systems in the area began interfering with those satellite signals. A Russian electronic warfare unit operating in the sector degraded the aircraft's GPS reception, reducing the number of available satellite connections. According to the operational description, the navigation display began showing unstable signals, leaving the pilot increasingly dependent on inertial navigation and pre-planned coordinates. At the same time, radar systems within the Russian air defense network started detecting intermittent returns from the aircraft. A P-18 VHF radar began registering brief echoes that appeared and disappeared as the aircraft moved through terrain features. Unlike many modern radars that struggle to detect extremely low-flying targets, VHF systems use longer wavelengths that can sometimes detect objects partially masked by terrain. Although the radar returns were brief, they were sufficient to establish a general flight path. The coordinates were transmitted to nearby air defense units, including a Pantsir system positioned several kilometers ahead of the aircraft's route. The Pantsir crew began rotating its turret toward the valley corridor through which the fighter jet was approaching. Additional missile teams stationed on rooftops attempted further interceptions using man-portable systems. Several missiles were launched at steep angles toward the aircraft's projected path. However, engaging a jet traveling at more than 500 knots from a stationary position presents major challenges. According to the operational account, some of the missiles failed to maintain stable trajectories, while others overshot their target. Inside the cockpit, the aircraft's radar warning receiver finally began issuing alerts as search radars in the area activated. These signals indicated that larger air defense systems were scanning the sector and attempting to acquire the aircraft. The warning tones confirmed that the fighter was approaching a zone where radar-guided missiles could be deployed. Despite these developments, the pilot continued flying toward the release point. The terrain was used repeatedly to break radar line of sight, with the aircraft briefly disappearing behind hills or infrastructure before reappearing again moments later. Each time the aircraft rose above terrain cover, radar systems attempted to refine the track. By approximately 10:08 hours, the air defense network had begun forming a coordinated engagement zone. A Pantsir air defense unit narrowed its radar search toward the valley corridor. At the same time, a Tor M2 missile battery positioned farther east began activating its radar systems. These systems require several minutes to reach full operational readiness, but the activation process had already been underway. As the fighter approached the planned release point for its weapon, the pilot faced a critical operational decision. To give the JDAMER sufficient glide energy and restore more stable satellite guidance, the aircraft would need to climb to higher altitude. However, climbing would also expose the aircraft to radar tracking and long-range missile engagement from the air defense systems already focusing on the corridor ahead. At approximately 10:09 hours, the Ukrainian MiG-29 pilot initiated the final phase of the mission by climbing sharply to create the conditions necessary for weapon release. The maneuver marked a significant change in the aircraft's flight profile. After spending most of the mission flying extremely low to avoid detection, the aircraft surged upward to several thousand feet in altitude. According to the operational description, the jet accelerated as the engines increased power, allowing the aircraft to gain height rapidly while approaching the designated release point. The climb was necessary for the deployment of the JDAMER guided munition carried beneath the aircraft's wing. The extended range variant of the Joint Direct Attack munition is designed to glide toward a target after release, using aerodynamic wings and satellite navigation to guide its trajectory. However, the weapon requires sufficient altitude and speed at the moment of separation to achieve its planned glide path and maintain accuracy. As the MiG-29 climbed, the aircraft became visible to radar systems that had been preparing to engage it. The Pantsir air defense unit positioned ahead of the aircraft began focusing its radar on the approaching jet. The system transitioned from a broad search pattern to a more precise tracking mode designed to lock onto a single aerial target. At the same time, the Tor M2 missile battery farther east continued completing its activation sequence, preparing its electronically steered radar array for engagement operations. Electronic warfare activity in the area continued to disrupt satellite navigation signals. The aircraft's navigation system registered a reduced number of stable satellite connections, which affected the reliability of precise positioning data. Because the JDAMER relies on satellite guidance combined with inertial navigation, degraded signals increased the risk that the weapon's accuracy could be reduced. Nevertheless, the pilot proceeded with the planned release profile as the aircraft climbed toward the predetermined point. During the climb, the aircraft's speed gradually decreased due to headwinds and the aerodynamic load of external stores. Maintaining sufficient speed was critical to prevent aerodynamic instability during the steep maneuver. At the same time, radar warning signals indicated that ground-based systems had achieved tracking lock. According to the operational account, a radar-guided missile was launched from a Tor M2 system and began accelerating toward the aircraft along an intercept trajectory. With the missile approaching and the aircraft nearing the release window, the pilot continued the climb long enough to reach the necessary altitude and alignment for weapon deployment. At approximately 15,000 feet, The pilot activated the release mechanism. Explosive bolts separated the 500-pound JDammer from its mount. After separation, the munition stabilized in the air and deployed its aerodynamic wings, enabling it to glide toward the programmed target coordinates. Once the weapon had separated successfully, the pilot immediately began evasive action. The aircraft rolled inverted and entered a steep descending maneuver intended to rapidly return to lower altitude, where terrain could again provide partial cover from radar systems. The missile launched by the Air Defense Unit continued approaching during this maneuver, while the MiG-29 accelerated downward toward the ground. The aircraft crossed back toward Ukrainian-controlled airspace while still sustaining significant damage. By that stage of the mission, one engine had already been shut down due to earlier missile fragmentation damage. Hydraulic systems were operating on backup capacity, and the airframe has sustained multiple punctures from fragments and anti-aircraft fire. Fuel reserves had also dropped significantly after prolonged high-speed maneuvering. Despite these conditions, the aircraft remained controllable and continued its return flight. Meanwhile, the JDAMER munition completed its glide trajectory toward the intended target. According to the operational description, the weapon struck the converted grain silo facility that had been used as a drone command hub. The munition penetrated structural layers of the building before detonating, causing extensive internal damage. The explosion triggered a large structural collapse within the facility. A significant portion of the reinforced structure reportedly failed as debris and dust were propelled upward from the impact point. Secondary explosions followed inside the damaged structure, which were attributed to stored equipment and munitions located within the building. The destruction of the facility ended the operation of the drone control site that had been functioning there. The target had reportedly been used to coordinate unmanned aerial vehicle sorties in the sector. The strike therefore removed a key operational node within the local drone command infrastructure. Following the strike, the damaged MiG-29 continued its flight toward Ukrainian territory, where ground crews prepared for its arrival. The aircraft approached its landing area while still operating under emergency conditions due to the earlier damage and reduced fuel levels. Despite the damage sustained during the mission, the aircraft remained airborne long enough to complete the return flight. The operation demonstrated the challenges faced by aircraft conducting strike missions in heavily defended airspace. Russian forces employed multiple layers of air defense during the engagement, including man-portable missile systems, anti-aircraft artillery, radar-guided missiles, and electronic warfare equipment designed to disrupt navigation signals. Even with these defenses active, the aircraft was able to reach its target and deliver the guided munition. Military analysts note that such missions rely on a combination of planning, terrain navigation, and timing. Low-altitude flight profiles are commonly used to reduce radar exposure, but they increase risk due to obstacles, limited maneuvering space, and short reaction times. In this case, the aircraft experienced damage and system failures during the flight, yet continued the mission to completion. The strike resulted in the destruction of the drone command facility, while the aircraft returned to Ukrainian-controlled territory with significant battle damage. According to the account of the operation, the mission ended with the aircraft landing safely and the targeted structure no longer operational.